Good morning, and thank you for connecting with your church in this way. Something that is familiar with close families and close circle of friends is something that goes like this. A person will begin to share the first stanza of a hymn or a song, and then the other people of the group will then continue to sing that song. Or someone will begin the first stanza of a poem, and then other members of that circle will then continue to repeat that poem. Or perhaps one person will begin to tell a story that is familiar to the community, and other people begin to jump in and tell that story. It is a symbol of the bond that those people have with one another. It identifies them as a close community. Here's an example. Some years ago, I was the pastor of a family of 4 people, a mother, a father, a son, and a daughter, and they had a tradition that every Christmas Eve, the father would say, "It was the night before Christmas." And then the mother, and all through the house, then the son, not a creature was stirring, and then the little daughter, not even a mouse. See how it goes? Say one stanza, and those who are in the community, those who are in the family or the circle of friends, will continue to share how that poem or that story or that hymn or song unfolds. I want you to hold on to that for just a moment. And let me now take you to the 15th chapter of Mark's Gospel. In the 15th chapter of Mark's Gospel, we have the arrest and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And it is my hope that those of you who have never traveled to the Holy Land will one day make that trip with Grace and me. Haven't scheduled it because of this pandemic, but we will return to the Holy Land one day. It is so meaningful to go to Jerusalem and go to the stone where Jesus Christ was chained and then he was whipped, and be right there where our Lord Jesus Christ was whipped before his crucifixion. I want you to understand something about the whipping that Jesus received. This was not the traditional leather whip that we think of. Rather, in the day of Jesus Christ, what they did is they took a large leather whip, and at the end, there were multiple endpoints. Loose pieces of leather, 5, 6, or 7 loose pieces of leather at the end, and at the end or the tip of each piece of leather was a bone fragment from an animal. The reason for doing this is that when the whip hit the back of the person being punished, the bone fragments tore into the flesh. And since there were 5 or 6 or 7 ends to the whip, each lash would tear into the flesh in 4 or 5 or 6 different places. That's how brutal the whipping was that Christ received. After he had been whipped, they took a crown of thorns, as you're familiar with, and they pushed it down upon his head. Can you imagine thorns being placed onto your head and pushed into your skull? And then Jesus was made carry his own cross. And today you can walk the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering. You can walk the path that Jesus Christ walked, carrying the cross upon his back. After having been whipped and a crown of thorns being placed upon his head, he carries his cross to the place of the crucifixion, where then they lay him down on the cross and they nail nails into his hands and into his feet. The reason for repeating all this for you is to say that by the time the cross was lifted, there was very little life left. Christ, whipped, crown of thorns, carrying his cross, nailed to the cross, lifted up, very little life left. Now, I want you to imagine the cross of Jesus Christ having been raised, and all of those who loved Jesus Christ, his family, and those disciples who followed him, who had placed all of their hope for the future in this man, there at the foot of the cross, looking at their Lord dying on a cross. As they were looking at Jesus Christ, their eyes were filled with tears, and they were questioning, is this the end? Is this the end of all of our hopes for our future? Is this the end of the tomorrow that we thought we would receive? And they were desperately listening to Jesus Christ upon the cross, hoping that he would offer another word of grace, a word of hope, a word of encouragement that this was not all that there would be. They were on their knees, foot of the cross, looking at their Lord dying, hoping that Jesus Christ could say something to lighten their burden, something that would give them hope. Now realizing that he only had a minute or two left before he would die, Jesus Christ speaks. It's right there in the 15th chapter. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then he breathed his last, and he died. Now, to the casual reader of that 15th chapter, you'll think, Jesus didn't offer them one word of hope. When they were looking for something of encouragement from Jesus Christ, all he could utter in his last breath was a plea to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? I want you to remember the family that I spoke of earlier where the father begins. It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. What happened when the people were looking to Jesus Christ for some word of encouragement, some word of hope? He gave it to them. He didn't look up to the heavens like the movies depicted Jesus Christ in his last words. Jesus Christ is looking at the people who are teary-eyed, wanting some assurance that this was not all there would be. He looks at them and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Those who did not believe in Jesus Christ, those who were not part of his community, they had no idea what he was talking about. In fact, Mark tells us that some said, I think he's calling out to Elijah. But those who knew Jesus Christ, his family, his disciples, those who had seen his miraculous work in the past 3 years of his ministry, they recognized what he was doing. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then, why do you stay so far away from me? I cry night and day, and you do not hear me. And then another speaks. And then I look up to the heavens, and I see God, still on God's throne, still in charge of the universe. And then another speaks, and I remember our ancestors. When they were in a dark place, they cried out to the God, and God answered them. And their tears were wiped from their eyes. And God said to them, this is not all there is. Salvation will come. Wait for it, for salvation most certainly will come. What was happening is that Jesus Christ was not crying out in agony, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was quoting Psalm 22. Look it up. The first stanza of Psalm 22 is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And when the people were looking up to the cross, hoping to receive some word of encouragement, some word of comfort from Jesus Christ, he only had a minute left in his life. And so what he did is he began to quote Psalm 22. And those who heard it began to complete the psalm. And the psalm reminded them that they were not the first people to cry out to God for help. And the psalm reminds them also that when they cried out to God, God said, this is not the end of the story. There is more to come. Wait for it, says Psalm 22, for you shall see the salvation of Israel. Jesus Christ gave the people exactly what they needed. He began to quote Psalm 22, and then among themselves, they finished reciting Psalm 22 and were emboldened with the knowledge that as dark as this moment is, God had more to come. These are dark days for our nation and for the world. The pandemic seems to not be abating at all, and people are concerned if there is a tomorrow. Psalm 22 reminds us that God is still on the throne and that God had come to the help of Israel in the past. That same God will come to our help today. This is not the end of the story. Because of Jesus Christ, there will be a tomorrow for us, and there will be a new day in which we will be victorious over this disease. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to being with you